studio mishandled, like director for hire kind of thing.
He kind of still comes through, I think.
All the production design is great. I love how specific and intricate all the different fractions are as far as their wardrobe, and I love the what are the Baron von Fartbag, his organization?
The Harkonnens.
Harkonnens.
Or Harkonnens, as they say in the new movie.
But how their kind of world is so industrial, and it's very David Lynch. And so there's all these great kind of like artistic choices that are very bold, which is another contrast to the new movie, because the new movie is so minimal. But the biggest failing is that it was kind of taken away from him, and you got to get it under 2 hours or something?
It was like 2 hours 16.
It's a little over 2 hours.
That was the studio mandate, but the biggest mistake was trying to do it all in one movie.
Yeah, because the last, 40 minutes of the movie just completely falls apart.
Yeah, that's like a whole other movie's worth of story to tell. And
well, that was the interesting thing about the new one, is it ends pretty much right where the David Lynch movie completely goes off the rails.
Yeah, as soon as he meets the Fremen, like Everett McGill and Sean Young, that's where the movie, they realize, okay, we've got to finish this up.
It's like a speed run.
We have 30, 40 minutes, and it's like none of them are characters. So Sean Young is barely a character in this movie.
They get introduced to each other, her and Kyle MacLachlan, and then the next scene, they're madly in love.
Yeah,
and then it's
like
4 years later, and then Paul has a little sister now. Where'd she come from? I don't know.
Well, you see, when two people love one another very much, and put the in the
Oh, is that how that works?
Yeah, so. And that was a weird...
Why didn't the movie explain this to me?
It should have.
It explains
had
everything else.
It had narration and inner monologue, which is another choice. Now, okay, so the studio mandated 2 hours, 16 runtime, something like that. I don't think Dino De Laurentiis really stood up for David Lynch. He said, okay, yeah, do what the studio say. Make it a movie, the 2 hour.
I'm a Chris Pratt.
Yeah, the Chris Pratt.
I mean, Dino De Laurentiis.
Yeah. So, David Lynch, I don't think even got to, he didn't have final cut on this movie, which he said he'll never, ever, ever do again. If there's anything like, David Lynch movies should not be getting notes or...
I think if you were to take any of his other movies after this and give them to a studio for notes, they wouldn't even know what to tell you to do.
Like, what am I watching? Yeah, so I think he was kind of forced to, do a cut. He never got to do a director's cut.
Well, he doesn't want anything to do with the movie after the experience of making it.
Yeah,
so.
You really can't. But another one of those choices is the inner monologue. Everybody is saying what they're thinking.
They must have killed her.
Here it comes.
Far off in the control rooms of spice gas.
But what of my unborn child?
One day I will have to do this.
Jim never has a second cup of coffee at home.
And I don't know if that was as a result of cutting it down to that length, and it did not make sense.
Yeah.
So then they didn't have any footage of people saying this stuff, so they just added this inner monologue.
Everybody's constantly
explain everything.
What's funny is it's a less comprehensible movie than the new version, even with constantly trying to explain it almost makes it worse as far as understanding what's happening.
Which is, it's like Tenet.
Yeah. Just stop talking.
Explains everything, and it just makes it. I still don't know what's happening, and I really don't care.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing too. Is when I first watched Dune, I know the book, and I know it's this really dense thing with all this stuff going on. So the movie's just constantly trying to keep you up to speed.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like stuff that's already like I can infer what's going on just based on the events of the movie. But then you have like, the first time I tried to watch Dune was in high school, because I was starting to get into David Lynch, and I knew it was kind of a disastrous movie. So I started it on VHS, and Virginia Madsen starts talking to the camera, and almost immediately is like, never mind. Maybe I'll come back to this someday.
You didn't like the fading in and fading out.
That is, travel to any part of the universe without moving. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you.
That's the weirdest thing, is like, it's almost like a joke, where it's like, oh, she's done explaining, fade out, and then it just fades right back up and she keeps talking.
And then she forgets, she's explaining the universe to bring you up to speed, it fades out and she's like, oh yes, before I forget.
Oh, I almost forgot one thing.
And then it fades back in, it is like a joke. It's like, what is happening?
In rewatching it though, because one of the things that the new one does so greatly is really make the story make sense for someone like me that hasn't read the books and doesn't understand all the details of everything.
But in a very natural way, like the exposition. You see movies where the scripts are, two characters are talking. They're talking about their backstory. Hey, remember when, blah, 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 and oh yeah, and then you did this, blah, blah, blah.
Or they say, like when a villain explains his plot and he says, as you know.
As you know, audience.
Yeah.
But
this movie trusts its audience to get what's going on, and it explains it all without it feeling exposition-y.
It does it all in a very natural way, just with the characters talking, and you're not necessarily saying anything sometimes, just sort of showing things, trusting everybody to get it. Yeah, so you go back to the Lynch one, you have that narration, and then it opens with, goes right from that to another scene of the Emperor meeting the Spacing Guild. They're asking the Emperor what the plot is, so he explains his grand plan.
Yeah.
He's going to have the Atreides take over from the Harkonnens on Dune, and then he's going to double-cross them. He doesn't like that the Atreides are becoming more popular, and he's like threatened by them.
Yeah.
So he's going to double-cross them and wipe them out. And then you're like, what the fuck is this thing in the tank? I do love the design of the creature. When they kind of wheel this thing in.
I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm correct in understanding what the fuck this cancerous tumor thing is. If you ingest or have too much exposure to spice, it mutates you?
Over time, okay, so these are the navigators.
Yeah.
The Spacing Guild's navigators. So they're kind of swimming in this gaseous tank of spice, and they've been exposed to it for so long that they've mutated and kind of develop the ability to see into the future. But they're not supposed to be as deformed. They're actually humans.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to be more humanoid. I think in the book they just kind of have flippers, and because they're kind of swimming, they don't really need their limbs anymore. And,
Okay.
David Lynch decided to push that.
But they're also responsible for space travel, right? When they're vomiting light in this movie.
Yeah.
That's them sending people through space? Is
yeah,
that right?
So the implication is that they're the ones kind of folding space to allow kind of interplanetary travel.
Okay.
But it's actually the ships that they're in, those big cylindrical ships. They have hyperdrives. I forget what Holtzman drives.
Okay.
They're the ones
Holtzman from the Ghostbusters 2016?
Yes, definitely.
Kate McKinnon's character?
Yeah.
Did she design these?
Yeah, she did.
Oh.
Yeah. So the navigators are the ones. So in hyperspace travel, you can't adjust, you can't avoid objects like planets. So the navigators can see into the future and kind of choose the best route and avoid, running headfirst into a planet or something like that. So
Okay.
The spice is actually needed. It's necessary for space travel. Without it, nobody would be able to travel anywhere. All trade would cease in the universe.
And the Villeneuve version, he just said, you know what? Let's just not show that.
None of that is important. you kind of
This is a faithful adaptation, but let's skip the space tumors.
Yeah, which I think he's probably holding off for the second one, which is
Okay.
probably smart. You can't overload the audience with all these things.
I think, that's again with the new one, what it does so well is
Yeah.
it is introducing all this stuff and all these different groups of characters without it feeling overwhelming or confusing.
Yeah, but
Because in the David Lynch one, when they wheel in
That thing-
giant testicle, you're like, what?
And I love, my favorite thing is they have these guys in the back with these giant shop vacs, and they're vacuuming up all the kind of slime and sludge on the ground.
yeah.
You see that? And they wheel it out, and they kind of do this half-ass cleaning job. The Emperor's floor is just covered in all this slime and goop.
But that's a great little detail
It's
where it's like
great.
David
It's
Lynch, he's
awesome.
not